Kelly Shaw, Rocky Mountain Sasquatch Organization. I'm back up here on Pittville Road in Northern California. I'm checking out the area again. Another Bigfoot sighting came into us from a friend, Bobby Reich, and he tells about his experience and his dad's experience back in here. I believe they were hunting. I will give you guys the report, and I'm going to scan around the area and show you what these remote woods look like.
As I said before, this was our good friend Bobby Reich that sends in his Bigfoot sighting reports. He's had a small handful of Bigfoot sightings in his life, he and his dad, and I believe this is probably what has turned him into an avid Bigfooter. Here is my dad and I stories. Approximately August 79 or 80 on Buck Hill at Pittville Road and Bridge Creek Camp, pretty close to where we are right now. I know I'm not in the exact spot, but I don't think Bigfoot just sits on his thumb where someone's seen him, so we're checking out the entire Pittville area. I know I'm within about 5 miles of exactly where this happened. I was walking down a hill in very dense young trees, black as night in there. Luckily only about 50 yards deep. Before entering this, you have to walk through some heavy, tall manzanita. After getting about halfway through the dense trees, I heard someone mumbling words like totally disgusting or disgusted, talking to himself, like the Tasmanian devil on the Bugs Bunny show. Walking across the path I had just crossed but into the manzanita, what sounded like words were not anything I could understand. I could not see what was talking, but there were no other people in my hunting zone or in that spot. I know it was Bigfoot. I was walking from north to south. It was walking from west to east. I come to understand later that this is what they call samurai chatter. Approximately 2 miles east of Pittville Road and Bridge Creek. Walking down a hill after during a drive with 2 others, I walked out of a bunch of tall, large trees, crossed a small grove of tall manzanita that opened into a clear cut that was about 150 yards long, 60 yards wide. On my left was tall trees, on my right was tall trees, but only about 20 yards deep that opened into another clear cut. I got about a third the way down the clear cut, hugging the trees on the left, when something growled behind me. Not just any growl, this was deep and vibrating, very low pitched. I turned around to look and scanned the manzanita, but saw nothing. I moved away from the trees to the center of the clear cut, on high alert as I could feel I was being watched. I then saw my uncle in the other clearing walking, so I finished the walk down. I hunt bear and know what they sound like, and this was not a bear. Approximately 2 miles east of Pittville and Bridge Creek. I was in junior high school. The date was mid-August 1981, archery season for deer. My uncle, my future brother-in-law, and myself had come back to this zone to hunt 3 more days before season had closed. We had already hunted here for 2 weeks, just a couple of weeks at the start of the season. During our opening season hunt, I found an old tree stand by a water hole and wanted to sit on it, but couldn't during the opening of the season as I rode with someone and didn't have a way to get there. So I decided to wait until we came up at the end of the season when I would have my ATV with me. So fast forward to the second trip there. My first day on the stand was uneventful. Saw deer come in, birds, squirrels, chipmunks, and so on. The second day, just before getting to my tree stand while on the ATV, I brushed up against some buckbrush and ran a thorn into my pinky knuckle. I made it to the stand, got up there and tried to cut it out with the knife, but ended up pushing it deep into the knuckle and could no longer move my finger, so couldn't use my bow. Had to go back to camp and wait for the others to take me to the hospital to get it surgically removed. Ended up cutting it out, and my finger was in a splint. Okay, day 3, last day in the tree stand. The part you've been waiting for. Let me explain the area so you can get an idea of what was around. The trees stand about 5 feet off the road, built between 4 medium-sized trees, so it was a pretty good-sized platform. Right in front of the stand was a pond. It was about 20 feet wide and 30 feet long. Mucky water. In from what was a clear cut running east to west, approximately 200 yards long. Then the clear cut hit a small hill and went up it. I would say it was about 150 feet. The clear cut was approximately 100 yards wide. I sat in the tree stand facing the west. The stand was at the right corner of the clear cut, about 20 feet from the right side. The right side was thick with trees about 25 yards deep beyond what is the clear cut. On the left side was thick trees. Behind the tree stand was a road running north to south. On the other side of the road was thick trees that went about 100 yards and then dropped off in a 45-degree angle to a lake a couple thousand feet lower. I parked my ATV about 100 yards down the road to the left of the tree stand. I walked to the stand, but decided I had better relieve myself before getting into the stand. I walked into the woods behind the tree stand, as I figured no deer would come from that direction due to the big drop-off at the end of the woods. I walked about 35 yards into the woods and did my business, buried it, and then walked back to the stand and climbed the tree. I turned around and sat down just as the loudest, angriest roar. It came from just where I was at. This was no bear or mountain lion. I've hunted bear and know how they roar. This roar was like a lion on steroids. It vibrated my body. I was petrified and couldn't move. I eventually got enough to turn around and look. Barely looking over my shoulder, I could not see past the trees I was sitting in. I could only see the road. I was shaking, frozen in place. No animals were making noise anymore. It was dead silent. About 15 to 20 minutes went by, and I was still scared to death. Then it did it again. This time, it was the thick of the trees to my left. Just before it went up the hill, I could see nothing in the trees, though I knew I was being watched. I could feel it. Still dead silent in the woods. Approximately 30 minutes, a lifetime went by, and I got a glimpse to my left near my ATV of something tall and black run across the road towards the direction of the last roar. That's how I know there was more than one of them. I got no more than a glimpse in my peripheral vision. This was about 3 to 3:30 in the afternoon. I knew I could not stay in this tree forever and did not want to be there come nightfall. So I waited until about 1 hour after the last roar and got out of the tree and ran for the ATV. I did not look into the woods as I ran. I got on the ATV, got the hell out of there. I have never been back there, and I never go alone in the woods anymore. Approximately 2 miles east of Pittville and Bridge Creek. I had just graduated high school, so this was mid-August 1982. The setting, archery season. This sighting was about 1 mile north of where I ran into 2 of them in 1981. The setting, we were on a logging road that had been cut into the side of the mountain. The same road that ran along the tree stand I sat in the year before and met 2 angry Bigfoot. We were headed south on the left side. There was about 5 to 10 feet of ground before it dropped off at a 45-degree angle, down to a lake a couple thousand feet below, covered in younger, older trees and manzanita. On the right was about a 6-foot bank, then manzanita, with occasional small tree. It was an old burn area growing back. The manzanita were about 5 feet high. My sister and I were in the back of the truck, elbows on the cab, and we were watching for deer. I was on the driver's side watching down the hill. She was on the passenger side watching up the hill. My dad was driving the truck. I can't remember who was in the front with him. As we were driving along, we were coming up on some small trees growing up next to the road, and branches were hanging over on my side. So I was going to have to grab my elbow and prepare to move either up or my arm down to avoid the brush. and the pine branches that were going to swipe me. At that point on my side of the truck, I was having small trees, 15 to 20 feet high manzanita. At about 30 yards from the small trees was a large group of thick, dense area. I glanced over to see if I needed to put my arm up or move out of the way, but then I started to look back. Down the hill my eyes caught Mr. Bigfoot, dead in my eyes. He was standing about 5 to 10 feet off the road on my side. He was by the tall trees, but behind a smaller one about 15 feet high. He had the top of the tree pulled to the side so he could see what was coming down the road. All I could see of his head and shoulder, part of the tree top he had pulled over to see us, was covering his chin. Another limb was covering the tree behind his head and shoulders, but his shoulder was so wide it stuck out past the limb about a foot. I could not see the cone of the top of his head. It was like his head was tipped backwards and big eyes like he was in shock or surprise to see us there. He was shiny black eyes with no white. I could see nostrils, but couldn't make out the nose. I could not see the lips or make out what could have been obstructed by the branch. The skin color of the face was black, just like a gorilla. His fur was about 3 inches long on his shoulder, but seemed shorter around the face. If you watch the Patterson film, you see that Patty had fur coming across her face and under her nose and lip. This one didn't. The face was just skin. It was just like a gorilla's face is laid out. Anyway, we locked eyes for a few seconds, and I looked back down the hill, I'm guessing because I was not believing what I'm seeing. I quickly looked back and got a glimpse of what I thought was a baby jumping off it. The tree that was standing behind was rocking back and forth. Right beside it, a few feet away, was another tree about the same size. So when I looked back, I got a glimpse between the trees of a body, part of the upper arm and part of the upper leg and back, but it was like it was jumping to the ground off the big one. But the big one was gone and just the top swaying back and forth. I was in shock of what I saw and backed up against my sister and looked straight ahead. I did not want to be on the side of the truck when we passed that tree in any second. I did take a quick sideways glance when we passed it. There was about 10 feet between the tree and the tall trees. It was a narrow clear about 40 feet deep and ended in tall manzanita. There was nothing there, thank God. After listening to many Bigfoot stories and watching shows, I have learned that Bigfoot get down on all fours to run fast. So I have come to the conclusion that what I thought was a baby Bigfoot jumping off the big one was in fact the big one going down on all fours to get out of there. What I saw on all fours was black, but the black was silver just like a gorilla. The silver ran down the entire back and about 3 inches onto its side. I have to mention about 50 yards back from where we were driving, on my sister's side looking up the hill, I saw a spring, I guess you could call it. The bank on the other side was 6 feet high and about 2 feet from that, a bank. I saw what looked like a water hose turned on. It was water squirting up from the ground about the same size around as a water hose that you would have 8 inches high. The water was not running over the bank, so it had to be going straight back into the ground. I think that Bigfoot was going there to get a drink when we surprised it. This was the last time I have ran into Bigfoot. Bobby Reich's dad and grandfather also had an encounter in the area. He writes, "My dad and grandfather in the daytime, while driving back to the camp from a store in Susanville, were about a mile from the camp on Pittville Road. My dad spotted something moving through the trees. It wasn't dense trees, sparse trees, young trees. He stopped the truck and looked. He said it was about 6 feet tall, tan and buff colored. Bigfoot. It was about 200 yards out, walking diagonally from him. He said it was exactly like the Patty film, but going the opposite direction. He said when it turned to look at him, he punched the gas pedal and got out of there. He and the other men went and looked for tracks the next day, but the ground was way too rocky and they couldn't find any. This was in August of 1977 archery season. This is almost word for word what you described in your video from Pittville Road Bigfoot sighting. I thought it was my dad's story until you got to the date it happened. My cousin lives up there, and he has also had encounters in August. We are going to go up there in a week to find a new campground since they blocked off the Bridge Creek from camping. I plan on filming my encounter spots. I would like to share my experience with you, Bobby. When I was setting up this camera for time lapse, I had not set up the camera yet, and that when I was filming the camera right there is actually when I went to pick it back up after doing the time lapse. But before I started filming the video, I set the camera up wanting to time lapse those contrails. There wasn't really a cloudy day, and I knew the contrails would move like clouds across the trees, so I set it up to do a time lapse, and I was down on one knee, hadn't even started the camera yet, and I heard some loud thumping behind me. I mean, that practically shook the ground. I mean, something loud, heavy, running behind me. And I expected to flip around and see a moose, an elk, or a deer, you know, and I whip around and there's nothing. And I mean, this was very close to me, probably within about 20 yards. And I'm like, what the heck, you know, and Bigfoot didn't even come to mind, even though I'm there doing a Bigfoot investigation. And so I walk off this direction right here, and I'm looking for it. And I'm like, what in the hell? And everything. And then I get this eerie feeling of being watched. And I'm like, you know, God, you know, is that Bigfoot that ran behind me? But, you know, I still want to find signs of an elk, a moose, or a deer. The Bigfoot phenomena is really hard for me to wrap my head around. I have not seen one myself out in the clear. But kind of rattled my nerves for about 10 minutes. Never did see or hear what made the loud running thumping sounds behind me. I didn't have either one of my cameras going, so it didn't record the running. It was loud and close, so I'm sure if I had one of my cameras going, the mic may have picked up something. But anyway, that was my experience there. Don't know what it was, not saying it was Bigfoot, but it was obviously something that was staying hidden from me. And what really bothered me is when I walked back here to investigate, you know, elk, deer, and moose, they just don't really hide. I mean, they'll stand there frozen and look at you and everything, or they turn and run. And I couldn't scare up anything and make it run, so obviously what ran behind me here was hiding. And I just had this odd sense of being watched, so like it hidden, now it's watching me. And yeah, just couldn't find it. But yeah, that's my experience. Thanks for writing us your Bigfoot experiences and your family's Bigfoot experience. It's amazing how just about all of them happened right here. We did another Bigfoot sighting report here, and after you saw it, you decided to send in yours. We thank you for those, and we'll continue to keep coming back to this area and looking for Bigfoot and evidence of Bigfoot. I hope you guys all enjoyed Bobby Reich's experiences, and there's my little experience when I was in here. Keep on watching. We're going to keep on squatching.